Hey Milton, got your email, and I'm on my way home, so I thought I would just do a quick video to kind of recap what we talked about and just give you a general highlights of the background and some of the general highlights of the rivalry that developed between Hamilton and Jefferson and why it was significant. So, big picture stuff, right? So you got to fill in the blanks with the specifics from Unit 1, but this is basically covering big picture from Unit 1, right? So between 1607 and 1700, you had those early 1700s, you had those colonies being chartered and established under that concept of salutary neglect, that unintended consequence or policy of the colonies developing independent from Great Britain. Right. Now that's significant to know for two reasons. One, it really explains their reaction post 1763, when the British Empire is going to begin to impose direct taxes on the colonists and laws without any kind of representation for the colonists, who were accustomed to governing themselves for nearly 5 generations. So that didn't really fly with them. The other thing to keep in mind about salutary neglect is that not only did they develop independently from Great Britain, but they developed independently from each other, right? So essentially, by the time we get to 1776, what we have, or 1763 really, what we have is 13 independent states, virtual independent states, right? Officially, they were colonies. When they joined together under the Articles of Confederation, that governing document was basically loosely confederating them together and maintaining that autonomy that they had developed over the colonial period, right? They were unwilling to give that up. So early United States under the Articles of Confederation really resembled what like the European Union is today, right? So Spain and Portugal and Germany and Belgium, all of the European countries that are part of the EU haven't surrendered their autonomy, right? But they're loosely confederated under the government entity called the European Union. So this is what the early United States was sort of like. 1781 to 1787, things went from bad to worse as far as the economy is concerned, and things looked like they were falling apart real quick. And the final kicker was Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. It really demonstrated that without a strong central authority, there was no way for these economic elites, these people that were used to creating policy and running the show and had a lot of wealth and a lot of wealth to lose. They realized that they could lose it all if this thing fell apart, because they created a central government under the Articles of Confederation that did not allow the federal government to come in and suppress insurrections. And from their perspective, that's what Shays' Rebellion was. And so they all meet back in Philadelphia in 1787, create the U.S. Constitution. It gets ratified in 1789. They all agreed that they did need a stronger central government, despite some of their reservations, since they had just fought a war in 1776 to 1781 to fight off a strong central authority. But they realized for the greater good, they needed a stronger central government. So they developed that concept of federalism, right? The division of power between the national government and the state governments, with the balance of power in favor of that national government, the United States of America government, right? Now the question that comes with federalism, and this is where we get into Unit 2, is to what degree is that balance of power in favor of the national government? Jefferson is going to argue it is to a lesser degree, and he's going to argue that because he's coming from the perspective of a Southern aristocratic plantation owner. And what he sees, given the vulnerability of the Southern states to the Northern states because of financial markets and the nature of their economy that had developed as an agrarian economy dependent on one or two cash crops. And so, as any agrarian economy, they have good years and they have bad years. During good years, you make a lot of money. During bad years, you got to find banks to lend you money to get you through those lean years. And the financial markets were in the north. So they have a dependency on the north that they definitely resent. Jefferson, like a lot of Southerners who are invested in this agrarian market and the institution of slavery, are worried about a stronger central government that could theoretically outlaw the institution of slavery. And it wasn't just an economic consideration for them, it was a way of life, right? White supremacy, the idea of it was predicated on the imposed condition of black inferiority. And so without slavery, they become very anxious that they will lose their very identity. So that there's a lot of sociological, psychological things to consider there. The North had begun outlawing slavery or phasing it out, and so this is kind of concerning the South. And things get really heated when George Washington turns to his Secretary of Treasury and says, do something about this economy. If we don't do something, we're going to fall apart as a young nation. And so Alexander Hamilton comes up with his report on public credit and a national bank. He also has a report on trade as well, but well, we don't get into that. But the two reports on credit and the bank are real important. One, he proposes to Congress to assume the debts that were incurred by the states to fight the American Revolution. A lot of them were in debt, and so that seemed like a pretty good idea to a lot of the states that were in debt. Not all of them were, but like Virginia was not. So the federal government is going to basically buy their debt from them. This is going to create further dependency, or basically impose a authority of the federal government on the states, right, by just assuming their debts. And so Jefferson is worried about that. He's just worried that the precedent that's being set, that the federal government, the national government, can just create a bank, even though there's nothing in the Constitution that says it can do that. Hamilton is going to argue, of course, the federal government, the national government, can create a bank. It's implied as part of its responsibility to regulate the economy, and a bank is a mechanism to regulate the economy. So that's going to be their disagreement that is going to develop. Hamilton is going to be is going to really push for this. People who support Hamilton are going to begin to create a political party called the Federalists. People who support Jefferson are going to create a political party called the Republicans, the Democratic Republicans. And it's basically developing out of this disagreement about what the Constitution intended when it came to creating policy, and Hamilton creating this bank that Jefferson sees as very problematic, because he just sees that as further strengthening the power of the federal government, and how it will lead to further conflict between the North and the South, because the South, every time the federal government gets more and more power, it is going to make the South a little bit more anxious about its institution that it highly values, called slavery, right? So that's about the gist of it. I don't want to give you too much because I'm going to run out of space on my phone. But I just want to give you kind of big picture stuff here. Think about how the North and the South developed. Think about how they were, the colonies and later states were independent of each other, how that caused problems for the economy and the general future of the early United States. They developed a new constitution that gave greater authority to hi Pooch! Greater authority to the national government, and this is going to begin to really scare the southern states, and that anxiety is going to be led by Jefferson in the early years. So yeah, do get the details for that rivalry in chapter 7. You'll get a lot of that. There's also an article posted in the folder of chapter 3 called The Best of Enemies. You'll find that very helpful. So do read that. Anyway, I'm going to get onto a busy street here, so I'll talk with you later. I hope that helps. Take care. Bye.